The stars had always called to humanity, and 40 years ago, they finally answered that call when Dr. Sarah Chun activated the first faster-than-light engine in human history. The jump was messy, and the ship almost broke apart. But humanity had done the impossible. They had touched the stars and survived to tell the tale. Within a decade, human colonies spread across nearby systems, and it was only a matter of time before they encountered others who walked among the stars. The first contact came not with war, but with an invitation. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel, Olive Branch, as it approached the largest structure she had ever seen. The eternal spire stretched across the void like a needle made of light and metal. Home to the Galactic Concord, an alliance of 12 ancient species, who had ruled this corner of the universe for over 10,000 years. "Ambassador, we are being hailed," her communications officer announced with obvious nervousness in his voice. Elena straightened her uniform and took a deep breath before responding. "Open the channel and let us meet our new neighbors." The face that appeared on the screen was not human High Counselor Tethran of the Selinary, had silver skin that seemed to shimmer like water, 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, young ones," Tethran spoke with what Elena thought was a smile. "The Galactic Concord has watched your species with great interest, and we believe you are ready to join our family of civilized worlds." Elena bowed respectfully and replied, "The United Terran Federation is honored by your invitation, High Counselor, and we come in peace with hopes of friendship and mutual prosperity." The negotiations that followed lasted for 6 months, and Elena worked harder than she had ever worked in her entire life. The Concord seemed generous at first, offering access to trade routes, scientific databases, and diplomatic protection under their laws. But there were conditions. There were always conditions. "Your species must accept placement in the Valen Reach," a Concord diplomat explained during one of many meetings. "It is a suitable region for a young species still learning the ways of galactic civilization." Elena pulled up the star charts and frowned at what she saw. The Valen Reach was a small cluster of 6 star systems on the very edge of Concord space, far from the wealthy core worlds and surrounded by empty void. "This region seems rather isolated," she pointed out carefully, not wanting to offend. The diplomat made a gesture that might have been a shrug and answered, "All young species begin at the edges, Ambassador, and in time, if you prove yourselves worthy, expansion will be permitted." There was another condition that troubled Elena far more. The Concord demanded that humanity reduce its military fleet by 70%. "This is non-negotiable," Tethran himself explained during a formal council session. "The Concord does not permit militarized newcomers, as it disrupts the peace we have maintained for millennia." Back on Earth, Admiral Marcus Chun, no relation to the famous doctor, slammed his fist on the conference table when he heard the news. "This is madness," he shouted at the assembled leaders. "They want us to disarm ourselves in unfamiliar territory surrounded by species we do not know or trust." President Williams held up a calming hand and responded, "Admiral, we have been offered something extraordinary here, membership in a galactic community that has existed for 10,000 years. And if the price of that membership is reducing our military, perhaps it is worth paying." "And if they turn on us?" the Admiral demanded. "What then?" "They will not turn on us," the President replied with confidence. "They are civilized beings, and we must show them that we are civilized too." The vote was close, but in the end, diplomacy won over caution. Humanity accepted the terms, and over the next 2 years, hundreds of warships were decommissioned, their weapons stripped and their hulls converted to cargo vessels and colony ships. Admiral Chun watched each ship leave the fleet with growing dread in his heart. But he was a soldier who followed orders, so he said nothing more. Ambassador Vasquez signed the final treaty on the steps of the Eternal Spire, while representatives from all 12 Concord species watched. And for a moment, she truly believed that humanity had found its place among the stars. Colonization of the Valen Reach began immediately, and millions of humans left Earth to build new lives on distant worlds. New Geneva became the crown jewel of human expansion, a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents that reminded the settlers of the home they had left behind. Families built homes and planted gardens and raised children who had never seen Earth except in pictures. New Shanghai rose on a desert world that human engineers transformed through sheer determination, turning barren rock into fertile farmland through terraforming technology that impressed even the ancient Concord species. Perhaps we underestimated these primates. One Concord scientist remarked to a colleague after visiting a human agricultural facility. His colleague made a dismissive sound and replied, "They are industrious, I grant you that, but they are still children playing at civilization." This attitude was common among the Concord species, and humans encountered it everywhere they went: subtle condescension, polite dismissal, and quiet laughter behind closed doors. Elena heard the whispers during diplomatic functions and saw the looks that passed between Concord representatives when humans spoke in council sessions. She reported her concerns to Earth, but the government was too focused on growth and prosperity to worry about hurt feelings. "We will prove ourselves through our actions," President Williams assured her. "Give it time, Ambassador." 15 years passed, and the Valen Reach flourished beyond all expectations. Human colonies became productive members of galactic trade, exporting unique goods and technologies that found eager buyers across Concord space. The children born on New Geneva grew up speaking multiple alien languages, dreaming of a future where humanity stood as equals among the stars. But in the shadows of the Eternal Spire, in chambers where no human was ever permitted to enter, the High Council watched humanity's success with growing unease. "They grow too fast," Councilor Rex of the Maldore hissed during a secret session. "Their population expands and their economy strengthens with each passing cycle." High Councilor Tethran nodded slowly, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he considered the problem. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it is time to correct our mistake." The other councilors leaned forward with interest, and Tethran smiled a smile that held no warmth at all. "I believe it is time to contact the Vraxith Dominion," he announced, and the fate of humanity was sealed in that single terrible moment. The Vraxith Dominion was everything the Galactic Concord pretended not to be: a brutal empire of conquest that had terrorized the outer regions for centuries. Their ships were weapons of war designed for one purpose only, and their soldiers knew nothing but violence and hunger for territory. High Councilor Tethran met with the Vraxith warlord in secret, aboard a hidden station far from any watching eyes. "We have a proposal for you," Tethran said smoothly, his silver skin reflecting the dim lights of the meeting chamber. Warlord Kreth was massive and terrifying, with scales like black iron and eyes that burned like dying stars. "The Concord wishes to make deals with us." Kreth laughed with a sound like grinding metal. "How interesting, considering you have declared us enemies for the past 1,000 years. Tethran showed no fear as he replied, "Circumstances change, Warlord, and we find ourselves with a problem that your dominion is uniquely suited to solve." He activated a holographic display that showed the 6 human colony worlds, their populations, their defenses, and their exact locations. The humans, Kreth recognized them immediately. The young species you invited into your precious Concord. "A mistake we now wish to correct," Tethran admitted without shame. "They grow too quickly and breed too fast, and their ambition threatens the stability we have maintained for millennia." Kreth studied the display with hungry interest and asked, "What do you offer in exchange for dealing with your problem?" "Complete coordinates to all human colonies," Tethran answered. "Full details of their defensive capabilities, and most importantly, the Concord will not interfere when you attack." The warlord grinned with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and extended his clawed hand. "You have a deal, counselor." 3 months later, the humans of New Geneva woke to a beautiful morning with clear skies and warm sunshine. Children ran through the streets on their way to school, and workers headed to their jobs in the factories and farms that had made the colony prosperous. Maria Santos kissed her husband goodbye and walked her 2 daughters to the transit station, never knowing that these would be her final moments of peace. At exactly noon, the sky turned black with Raxith warships. They came in overwhelming numbers, hundreds of vessels. That blotted out the sun and filled the air with the screaming sound of their engines. There was no warning and no demand for surrender, only fire raining down from above. The first orbital strikes hit the capital city, and buildings that had taken years to construct vanished in seconds. Maria grabbed her daughters and ran, but there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. All across the planet, the story was the same: families torn apart, homes destroyed, and people dying by the thousands with each passing minute. The small human defense fleet stationed in the Valen Reach responded immediately, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Captain James Wright commanded the destroyer Defiant and refused to retreat even as his ship burned around him. "All ships, protect the evacuation transports," he ordered through gritted teeth. "Get as many civilians off-world as possible." But there were not enough ships and not enough time. The Vraxith were everywhere, and their weapons were designed to kill as efficiently as possible. 12 million people died on New Geneva in just 6 hours: men, women, and children whose only crime was dreaming of a better future among the stars. The other 5 human colonies suffered the same fate as Vraxith forces struck simultaneously with perfect coordination. New Shanghai burned, and the terraformed gardens that humans had worked so hard to create turned to ash. The mining settlements on Titan Prime were cracked open like eggs, their populations exposed to the vacuum of space. On Earth, the news arrived like a physical blow that staggered everyone who heard it. President Williams collapsed in his chair as he watched the footage of New Geneva burning, tears streaming down his face. "How could this happen?" he whispered in horror. "Why would the Vraxith attack us without provocation?" Admiral Chun stood rigid with fury as he answered, "Because someone told them exactly where to strike and exactly how weak we were. And there is only one group that had that information." Ambassador Vasquez was already transmitting emergency requests to the Galactic Concord, begging for military assistance under the mutual defense provisions of their treaty. "Please," she pleaded with every Concord representative she could reach. "Our people are dying, and we need help immediately." The responses she received were silence, complete and absolute silence. No ships were dispatched to help humanity, and no statements were issued condemning the Vraxith attacks. Finally, after 3 days of desperate attempts to contact the Council, Elena received a single official message. "The Galactic Concord hereby suspends the United Terran Federation's membership, effective immediately." The message read in cold, formal language. "This action is taken in response to humanity's provocation of external conflict, and the Concord bears no responsibility for the consequences of human aggression." Elena read the message 3 times before she could believe what she was seeing. They were blaming humanity for being attacked, and they were abandoning them to die. She tried to enter the Eternal Spire to demand an explanation, but Concord security forces blocked her path with weapons drawn. "You are no longer welcome here, human," the security commander stated without emotion. "Leave Concord space immediately, or you will be detained." Elena retreated to her ship with her small diplomatic staff, all of them in shock at what had just happened. As the olive branch fled toward Earth, Elena recorded a final transmission that would be broadcast to every human across the stars. "They sold us," her voice cracked with grief and rage. "They sold us to die, and they have been planning this from the very beginning." Back on the Eternal Spire, High Counselor Tethran watched the human ambassador flee and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "The human problem has been contained," he announced to his fellow counselors. "Let this serve as a lesson to any other young species that grows too ambitious for its own good." The other counselors applauded and congratulated themselves on their wisdom and foresight. They had eliminated a threat to their power, and they had done so without dirtying their own hands. But across the void, on a small blue planet called Earth, Admiral Marcus Chun stood before the survivors of humanity's shattered government. "I warned you," he said quietly, but his words carried the weight of mountains. "I warned you not to trust them, and now millions of our people are dead." President Williams had aged 20 years in 3 days, and he could barely meet the Admiral's eyes. "What do we do now?" he asked in a broken voice. Admiral Chun looked at the burning colonies on the display screens, at the faces of the dead whose names filled endless lists, and at the footage of Raxith soldiers executing human prisoners while Concord ships watched from a safe distance. "Now," he answered with ice in his voice and fire in his heart, "we go silent, and we prepare. And when the time is right, we make them pay for every single life they took." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over everyone present. Humanity had been betrayed by those they trusted, and that betrayal would never be forgotten or forgiven. In the weeks following the massacre, something strange happened in human space. All communication stopped. Trade ships that approached the borders of human territory found nothing but empty void and silent beacons. The massive relay stations that had connected humanity to the galactic network went dark one by one until there was nothing left but silence. The Galactic Concord noticed, of course, but they were not concerned. "The humans have retreated to lick their wounds," Counselor Vrex reported to the High Council with amusement in his voice. "Their spirit is broken, and they pose no further threat to galactic stability." High Counselor Tethran nodded with satisfaction and replied, "Let them hide in their little corner of space, and eventually they will fade away like so many other failed species before them." The Council moved on to other matters, and humanity was forgotten like yesterday's news. Years passed, and rumors began to spread to the darker corners of galactic society. Some said that Earth had been destroyed by civil war as the survivors fought over the scraps of their broken civilization. Others claimed the Vraxith had finished the job and wiped out the remaining human colonies. A few whispered that humanity had simply given up and allowed themselves to die out from despair. The Concord sent intelligence operatives to investigate, curious about the fate of their former members. The first operative was a Moldari spy who slipped past the human border with technology that should have been undetectable. He was never heard from again. The second was a team of Cylinary scouts using the most advanced stealth ship in the Concord fleet. They vanished without a trace. Over the next decade, 17 separate intelligence missions entered human space, and not a single one ever returned. "Perhaps we should be concerned," one junior counselor suggested during a security meeting. Tethran dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand and answered, "The humans are scavengers picking off isolated ships, nothing more, and they lack the resources or will to pose any real threat." But Tethran was wrong. He was so very wrong. Deep within the Sol system, hidden behind a massive sensor-blocking field that humanity called the Soul Barrier, something incredible was happening. Every factory on Earth worked day and night, producing weapons and ship components with desperate efficiency. Every mining operation in the asteroid belt extracted resources at maximum capacity, feeding the hungry forges of war. Every shipyard constructed vessels unlike anything humanity had ever built before, not explorers or traders, but warships designed for one purpose only. Admiral Marcus Chen, now in his 70s but still as sharp and determined as ever, oversaw the entire operation from his command center on Luna. "Status report," he demanded during his daily briefing. Commander Sarah Chun, his granddaughter and one of the brightest tactical minds of her generation, pulled up the latest production figures. We have completed 642 capital ships, Admiral, with another 1,800 in various stages of construction. The Admiral studied the numbers and nodded slowly before asking, "And the new weapon systems?" "The kinetic accelerators are performing beyond expectations," Sarah reported with pride. "They can punch through any known shield technology in the galaxy. The adaptive shielding has been successfully tested against Vraxith weapon signatures." Another officer added, "Our ships will be effectively immune to their primary armaments." "And the Hellfire torpedoes?" the Admiral asked with particular interest. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she answered, "Antimatter warheads with yields sufficient to crack a planet, Admiral, though I hope we never need to use them at full power." Marcus Chen looked at the holographic display showing the growing fleet and felt something he had not felt in 20 years: hope. But hope was not enough to fuel the massive undertaking that humanity had begun. What drove them was something darker and more powerful: the memory of 12 million dead on New Geneva, the faces of children who would never grow up, the screams of families torn apart by Vraxith weapons while the Concord watched and did nothing. Every worker in every factory carried that memory like a burning coal in their chest. Every soldier training for the battles to come repeated the names of the lost like a sacred prayer. Every engineer designing new weapon systems imagined those weapons tearing through Vraxith hulls and Concord stations. 20 years of preparation, 20 years of sacrifice, 20 years of building the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen, all driven by a single unified purpose. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now retired from diplomatic service, visited the Admiral's command center on the 20th anniversary of the massacre. She was old now, her hair white and her face lined with age, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had kept her going through the darkest days. "Is it ready?" she asked as she looked out at the fleet assembling in the void beyond Luna. Admiral Chun stood beside her and answered, "Almost old friend, and when it is complete, we will deliver a message that the galaxy will never forget." "They think we are dead," Elena said quietly. "Let them think that," the Admiral replied. "Let them believe they won, and let them grow comfortable in their arrogance." He turned to face her directly and continued, "When the soul barrier drops and our fleet emerges, they will learn the truth that humanity does not die so easily, and humanity does not forgive those who murder its children." Elena reached out and placed her hand on the old warrior's shoulder. "I only wish I could be there to see their faces," she admitted. "You will be," Admiral Chun promised. "I want you on the bridge of the flagship when we arrive at the Eternal Spire, and I want you to be the one to deliver our terms." Elena's eyes widened with surprise before she nodded with fierce determination. "It would be my honor, Admiral." Across human space, the final preparations were being made. Soldiers completed their training and said goodbye to their families. Engineers ran final diagnostics on weapon systems that had never been tested in actual combat. Pilots practiced formations and attack runs in simulators that recreated Concord and Vraxith vessels with perfect accuracy. And in the quiet moments, when the work was done and the day was ending, humans everywhere looked up at the stars and whispered promises to the dead. "We are coming," they said. "We have not forgotten you, and we will make them pay." The galaxy believed that humanity was finished, a failed experiment that had been corrected and contained. They were about to learn how terribly wrong they were. Admiral Chun gave the order that would change everything. "Begin final fleet assembly," he commanded. "In 30 days, the soul barrier drops, and we remind the galaxy what happens when you betray humanity." The soul barrier had stood for 20 years, like an impenetrable wall of silence between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Ships that approached it could detect nothing beyond, No signals, no energy signatures, no signs of life at all. Most species had stopped trying to penetrate it long ago, assuming that whatever lay behind was not worth the effort. Then, without warning, the barrier dropped. Sensor stations across Concord space lit up with alerts as the massive field collapsed, and what they detected on the other side made operators freeze in disbelief. "This cannot be correct," a culinary technician whispered as he checked his readings for the 5th time. "The numbers are impossible." His supervisor pushed him aside to look at the screen, and the color drained from his silver face. 2,400 warships sat in perfect formation at the edge of human space, dreadnoughts the size of small moons, carriers bristling with fighter craft, and assault cruisers that radiated menace with every line of their design. The flagship alone was larger than any vessel the Concorde had ever constructed, its hull black as the void between stars and its weapons arrays glowing with barely contained power. Across every frequency, in every language known to galactic civilization, a single message began to broadcast. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation Navy, speaking from the flagship TN's Retribution." His voice was calm and steady, carrying the weight of 20 years of preparation and the fury of billions who demanded justice. "The Terran Federation demands an audience with the Galactic Concorde at the Eternal Spire, and you have 1 solar cycle to comply." There was a pause, and when the Admiral spoke again, his voice had turned to ice. "There will not be a second request." Panic erupted across Concorde space as the message spread. Emergency sessions were called on the Eternal Spire, and counselors shouted over each other in fear and confusion. "How is this possible?" Counselor Vrex demanded. "We were told the humans were finished." High Counselor Tethran sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what his own eyes were showing him. 20 years ago, he had orchestrated the elimination of a troublesome young species, and now that species had returned with a fleet that dwarfed anything the Concorde could field. "We must negotiate," one counselor urged. "We must find a peaceful solution before this escalates further." "Negotiate," another scoffed. "After what we did to them, do you truly believe they will accept anything less than our complete destruction?" While the Concorde debated, the Vraxith Dominion acted. Warlord Kreth had grown old and fat on the spoils of his victory over humanity, but he still commanded a fearsome fleet. "These humans are bluffing," he declared to his generals. "They build some pretty ships, but they do not have the warriors to use them effectively." He dispatched 300 warships to intercept the human fleet, confident that Vraxith's superiority would crush these upstart primates once and for all. The two forces met in the Korath Nebula, a swirling cloud of gas and dust that had witnessed countless battles over the millennia. Warlord Kreth watched from his command ship as his fleet moved into attack formation, fully expecting an easy victory. "All ships, weapons free," the Vraxith commander ordered. "Show these humans what real warriors can do." The Vraxith opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes streaking across the void toward the human formation. What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. Human shields flared with adaptive energy that absorbed and redirected the Vraxith attacks harmlessly into space. Before the Vraxith could fire a second volley, the human fleet responded. Kinetic accelerators launched tungsten rounds at a significant fraction of light speed, and Vraxith's shields shattered like glass under the impact. Hellfire torpedoes followed, antimatter warheads that turned warships into expanding clouds of superheated debris. Human fighters swarmed from carrier bays, smaller and faster than anything the Vraxith had ever encountered, slipping through defensive formations and targeting critical systems with surgical precision. The battle lasted exactly 11 minutes. When it was over, 300 Vraxith warships had been reduced to scattered wreckage, and not a single human vessel had suffered more than superficial damage. Warlord Kreth escaped with a handful of survivors, his flagship barely functional as it limped back toward Dominion space. Impossible, he kept repeating as his officers reported the extent of the disaster. This is impossible. The footage of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours, and everyone who watched it felt the same cold realization. This was not the humanity they remembered. This was something new and terrifying, forged in the fires of betrayal and honed by 2 decades of relentless preparation. On the Eternal Spire, the Concorde watched the battle footage in horrified silence. "We cannot fight that," Council of Rex stated the obvious. "Our combined fleet would not last an hour against such weapons." High Counselor Tethran finally found his voice. Though it trembled with fear, he could not hide. "We will gather our forces at the Spire and negotiate from a position of collective strength. For surely, the humans will not attack the seat of galactic civilization." But even as he spoke, Tethran knew the truth that he dared not admit. There would be no negotiation, only reckoning. The human fleet began its advance toward the Eternal Spire, moving with the unstoppable inevitability of a force of nature. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Retribution and watched the stars slide past as his fleet covered the distance that would bring them to their destination. Ambassador Vasquez stood beside him, older now, but no less determined. 20 years ago, they threw me out of that station and told me humanity was no longer welcome, she said quietly. "And now?" Admiral Chun asked. Elena Vasquez smiled with grim satisfaction as she answered, "Now, we are coming back, and this time, they will listen to every word we have to say." The Admiral nodded and turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to the Concorde, and let them know that the Terran fleet will arrive at the Eternal Spire in 48 hours. He paused, then added with cold finality, "Tell them to have their counselors ready to answer for their crimes, because justice delayed will not be justice denied." The message was sent, and across the galaxy, every species watched and waited to see what would happen when humanity reached the heart of the civilization that had betrayed them. The day of reckoning was almost at hand. The Eternal Spire hung in space like a monument to 10,000 years of galactic civilization. But on this day, it looked more like a fortress preparing for siege. 800 warships from all 12 Concorde species had assembled in a defensive formation around the station, the largest combined fleet in the Alliance's history. High Counselor Tethran stood in the observation chamber and tried to project confidence as he addressed his fellow leaders. "We will show these humans that the Concorde cannot be intimidated," he declared. "Our combined might will give them pause and force them to negotiate reasonable terms." But his 4 eyes kept drifting to the sensor displays, watching the approaching wall of human warships with growing terror. The Terran fleet emerged from FTL travel in perfect formation. 2,400 vessels arranged in battle configuration that seemed to swallow the stars themselves. The TN's Retribution took position at the center of the formation, its massive hull dwarfing even the Concorde's largest dreadnoughts. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the enemy fleet with the calm evaluation of a predator studying prey. "Ambassador Vasquez, please transmit our terms," he ordered. Elena stepped forward to the communications console and opened a channel that would broadcast to every ship in the Concorde fleet and every screen on the Eternal Spire. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. 20 years ago, I stood on that station as a friend and ally, and I was betrayed. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. "The Terran Federation demands the following: immediate surrender of all individuals responsible for orchestrating the massacre of human colonies. Full reparations for every human life lost, calculated at the standard galactic rate. And permanent dissolution of the current Concorde Governing Council." Across the Concorde fleet, officers exchanged nervous glances as they absorbed the severity of the demands. If these terms are accepted, Elena concluded, there will be no further bloodshed, but if they are rejected... She did not need to finish the sentence. High Counselor Tethran's response came within minutes, broadcast with the arrogance of someone who still believed he held power. The Galactic Concord does not negotiate with barbaric species that threaten civilized worlds, he announced. Your primitive display of force does not frighten us. And if you do not withdraw immediately, we will be forced to defend ourselves. Admiral Chun actually smiled at those words, a cold and terrible expression that made his officers shiver. He has made his choice, the Admiral said quietly. All ships, weapons free. The Battle of the Eternal Spire began with a storm of kinetic rounds that tore through the Concord's forward line like paper. Ships that had taken years to build and crew vanished in seconds, their shields useless against weapons designed specifically to defeat them. The Concorde fleet attempted to return fire, but human ships danced through their formations with impossible speed and precision. Carriers launched wave after wave of fighters that swarmed the larger Concorde vessels, targeting engines and weapon systems with devastating accuracy. Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold on his tactical display and felt no joy, only the grim satisfaction of justice, long delayed, finally being delivered. Focus fire on the flagship carriers, he ordered. Disable their command structure and force surrenders where possible. He had no desire for unnecessary slaughter, but he would not hesitate to destroy any ship that continued to fight. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. When the Concorde fleet finally broke and scattered, over 600 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the rest fled in all directions. The Eternal Spire's defensive shields failed under concentrated bombardment, and boarding craft launched from the Retribution. Human Marines stormed the station with weapons ready, moving through corridors that had once welcomed them as honored guests. They encountered little resistance. Most of the station's security forces had already surrendered, unwilling to die for leaders who had brought this catastrophe upon them. High Counselor Tethran was found cowering in his private chambers, surrounded by aides who abandoned him the moment the Marines arrived. Please, he begged as soldiers dragged him to his feet. I can explain. I can make this right. The Marine commander looked at him with undisguised contempt and replied, You will have the opportunity to explain yourself at your trial, Counselor. One by one, every member of the High Council who had voted for humanity's betrayal was captured and brought before the cameras. Ambassador Vasquez stood on the steps of the council chamber, the same steps where she had once signed a treaty of friendship and addressed the galaxy. These individuals conspired to commit genocide against an innocent species, she declared. They sold the lives of millions to a foreign power and watched as children were slaughtered. And now they will answer for their crimes. Admiral Chun took his place beside her and began reading the names. Every human colony that had been attacked, every ship that had been destroyed, every man and woman and child who had died because of the Council's treachery. The reading took 4 hours, and not a single person in the galaxy changed the channel. The trial that followed was broadcast across all of known space. Evidence was presented, recordings of secret meetings, communications with the Raxith, documented plans to eliminate humanity before they could become a threat to Concorde dominance. The accused had no defense that could justify what they had done. High Counselor Tethran and 11 other counselors were found guilty of crimes against sentience and sentenced to death. The executions were carried out swiftly and without ceremony, not for vengeance, but for justice. The Raxith Dominion, their fleet shattered and their warlord disgraced, surrendered unconditionally. Human forces occupied their homeworld to ensure compliance, and reparations were extracted that would take generations to pay. But humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy or destroy the species that had wronged them. Admiral Chun addressed the surviving Concord representatives with words that would echo through history. "We did not come here as conquerors," he said. "We came here to ensure that what happened to humanity will never happen to anyone else." He unveiled the Terran Accords, a new framework for galactic civilization based on equality, mutual respect, and genuine protection for all species, regardless of their age or power. "There will be no more young species relegated to the edges," Elena Vasquez added. "No more disarmament of newcomers, and no more secret councils deciding the fate of billions." The accords were signed within the week, and a new era began. Months later, Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the observation deck of the Retribution one final time before his retirement. A young officer approached him hesitantly and asked, "Admiral, is it truly over now?" Chun looked out at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed humanity's greatest tragedy and greatest triumph. "The war is over," he answered, "but our work has just begun." He turned to face the young officer with eyes that still burned with determination. "They will remember what we did here, and they will remember what we are," he said. "Humanity does not forget, humanity does not surrender, and humanity will never again allow itself to be betrayed." The young officer saluted, and Admiral Chun returned the gesture before walking away. Behind him, the galaxy stretched out in all directions, filled with species who had learned a lesson they would never forget. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and the stars would never be the same.